when we look at any layout, we have to make an assumption as to where people's primary positions are going to be, given how safe they are to make them. And as we know, given the current meta of paintball, generally speaking, people will fan out, especially in a layout like this. People will typically fan out like this, right? That's how pro players and high-level players close out a game really quickly, is they keep in their minds, well, given the set of bunkers that my opponents who are mirrored against me, given those bunkers and where they could be, it means that when I see a particular player walk off the field, I know who's left in front of me. Or again, assuming you see those people. Like there's a big difference between playing the Omaha as a number 3 versus playing the Omaha as a number 1. Okay, there's a big difference, and that is that the game has developed by the time the number 3 is in this position, which means that they do not have the dynamic of somebody watching over them and having a lot of the principles that a number 1 would need to know in this scenario. In a way, you're playing a very guerrilla style or scrappy style, so to speak, of those positions. So this topic of how I analyze or how I look at a field came about when I was recounting to the D4 and D5 squads what worked and what didn't work. Because this past weekend, we didn't have a chance to scrimmage a team outside of the Bro Army camp. We were having a lot of issues with our field because our field was actually really flooded, and we weren't sure if we were going to be able to get a team to come scrimmage us because of those reasons, and we didn't want to go to a local field to spend a lot of money to play, just because we've been spending a lot of money. So anyway, we ultimately just decided to scrimmage against ourselves and then do a bunch of drills and stuff, like, you know, setting up gauntlet drills on both sides of the field and things like that, doing off the break shooting. And that was valuable. I'm not sure. I mean, I would say it would always be better to scrimmage the weekend prior to the event against teams of similar caliber, but we'll see what happens. So anyway, but when I was recounting to the Division 4 and 5 guys what we had learned on the layout, I was able to do it in pretty accurate detail. And it got me to thinking like how it is that I'm able to do that. And I think it's partly because I break down the field in such a way that makes things easy to retain. Like, it makes it really easy to retain information, because I don't look at, for example, I don't look at any layout as just a huge cluster of bunkers that I have to decipher and make sense of, but that I look at fields and layouts typically in 3 distinctive sections. And so that's what I want to like just briefly cover and share with you guys. And my hope is that by explaining this, you will be able to walk away from it having maybe a similar mindset when you go walk a new layout that will help you break down the field quicker and easier, and also be able to retain what worked and what didn't also really easy. Because I can tell you very succinctly what I did, like pretty much everything I tried and what worked and what didn't. Also, given what we were doing on the other side of the field for the most part, in pretty specific detail, given our Seattle Thunder scrimmage, which was 2 weekends ago. So, or almost, it was, I guess, last weekend. Anyway, so let me show that. Very concise breakdown this last weekend. I appreciate it. Grabs paper and pencil. Teach senpai, I'm listening and ready to learn. So again, this is probably very obvious to a lot of you and a lot of people who will end up watching this. But I think this is helpful to beginner players and players who just want to be able to process each side of the field quicker, especially in blind layout tournaments, right? So here's how I look at things, okay? It probably is obvious, but the way that I view a layout is in 3 distinctive sections, okay? I look at the layout from essentially like this, and we'll actually use different layouts to further drive home this point. I think it's easy, you know, when people have had 2 weekends to practice a layout, I think it's pretty easy to run through this exercise and have most of this be obvious. But I think on a new layout, it becomes less obvious, because without that experience playing it, it becomes a little more difficult. So, I look at, obviously, like most people, I look at the layout in 3 distinctive places. So the D side, the center, and the snake, okay? And where I draw those lines is also very important, okay? So on this layout in particular, I draw the lines just behind essentially the insert bunkers on both sides of the field, which will give me my snake side, my Dorito side, and then by extension, my center. And the reason I do this is because this bunker, as we know, almost always this is almost exclusively a Dorito side bunker, right? Like it's a number 2 on the D side's primary bunker, in addition to the beast right here is what we call that, the beast. Okay. So the reason we draw this line as well is because this is usually the shortest you should ever go if you're a front player and you're trying to play safe. Okay. So, I mean, again, this all might be obvious, but like sometimes you do see D5 teams that will do some pretty crazy and wacky things because they're not analyzing the field in those 3 distinctive sections, right? So sometimes you might get a case in which 2 teams, like they'll stack up the back center. Like let's say the number 2 on the D side stacks the back center and then looks up the center on the Doritos. And then the number 1 on the snake side does this. Now, with paintball, it always has to be said that anything is possible, and there is certainly an element of like tact that can be applied to help mind or metagame your opponents, right? And we've seen in several layouts where double stacking the home and pulling up super short can actually be the difference between winning that point and losing that point, because now you have more guns off the break, it's safer to do so, yada yada yada, right? That to me is a case-by-case basis in which you have to have a very distinctive purpose for doing something like that, right? It can't just be because, well, we're dying on the Dorito side, so we have to pull up short, right? It needs to be, we're doing this because we're trying to kill a specific player, and then our secondary move is going to cover that difference in positioning, right? So if we use this principle, or rather this understanding, when we draw this field, then we can again understand that really, generally speaking, when you are trying to break out from the very beginning, the shortest you should ever pull up is this bunker. That's the minimum widest. Why can't I think of how to say that? You guys get what I'm trying to say. That's the shallowest you can go on the D side, okay? The same is true for the snake side. Again, if we draw this bunker, if we draw this line on the snake side, and I'll explain again a little further why we're drawing this line, because I've kind of explained it, but in a roundabout sort of way. But again, if we draw that line here, then we can also understand that this is the shallowest we should ever go on the snake side. And because, well, let me get into the reasons here in just a second by understanding first why we draw this line here. So part of the reason that we draw this line here is because when we look at any layout, we have to make an assumption as to where people's primary positions are going to be, given how safe they are to make them, right? And as we know, given the current meta of paintball, generally speaking, people will fan out, especially in a layout like this. People will typically fan out like this, right? I'm just using this as a very basic example. I'm not necessarily trying to do this for this field in particular, okay? So this would be a very, very basic breakout, right? Where people are kind of evenly dispersed across the field, and we're trying to do our best to get a player far up on either side while still staying alive, right? Now, obviously, the number 2s on either side of the field can audible and go different places, including the number 1, right? We can do something like this, where, or I should have drawn this guy going to the god, but you guys get what I mean, right? You can audible to send people up further, kind of up the center, or lastly, you can send people to go to the corners and yada, 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 right? And this isn't to say that you couldn't do this as well, but there's actually a really important reason why you don't do this. Okay, so I intentionally drew the breakout previous to this and not this one because of this very distinct reason, which is that these people, if they go here off the break, run through the same zone. They run through the same lane, and then you get chopped up for that reason. So typically speaking, you don't want to do that. And so when you end up deciding to go to the corner, you have to take a safe bunker in addition to that, or behind that, right? Or you have to delay. You have to do something that prevents you guys from running through the same gap at the same time. Okay. And that there's very good plays that work off of that, but we're not going to get into that. Okay. So again, if we work off of the assumption that everybody's breaking out to these dispersed, safe-ish bunkers, then what we can start to understand is where people, those are where people tend to go. And therefore, if that's where our opponents tend to go, then we have to respond to that. Okay. By not giving them that ground for free. So let's go back to our previous example where we decided to double stack the home and then we send one guy here and we apply that basic understanding of what a breakout looks like. Okay. Well, now all of a sudden, even in this position right here, the moment that we get to these bunkers, we have immense pressure put on us that is preventing us from breaking out of the home and spacing out our positioning, right? From the very get-go. And this doesn't even require the person, in this case, behind the Dorito 1 to do really anything, right? And so this frees up this person right here to do something else. So if they were to break out like this, and if I was in the Dorito 1 and I broke out and I said, hey, Iowa, Nevada, which is our zone calls, to tell us how far up the field, how far in the field people are like absent, I guess you could say. If I call Nevada in this situation, then my teammate behind me knows, and I say I've got the widest guy or whatever, or I've got the beast, then that frees this dude to just do whatever he wants, which usually ends up looking like that, where then he does this and he picks up this job, which then frees me to do this and then close out the game. Again, assuming you don't get shot off the break. That's really where the left side has the advantage. That's the only case in which the left side would it's a high risk, therefore high reward sort of scenario, right? Because this guy in the home is going to be shooting over for the Dorito runner, and this guy's also going to be shooting for the Dorito runner. And so assuming he kills this dude, then this is the widest guy, and then this guy can fan out, and that works. But again, that's a high risk, high reward scenario, because if this is not a super easy kill shot. It is there. It is something that's very doable, but it's not like guaranteed. So it's just a risk you have to take. Okay. All right. So understanding that, then what we then have to know is, well, if this is typically where people break out, just from a default perspective, then we need to be in some position that allows us to respond to that move, right? In a way that is not unreasonable or like too far. So it's too far really to make the move from here to here to respond to that. You can do it, and it has been done, but it's unreasonably far away. It's also unreasonably far away to make that same move from the home all the way around this cake and into that Dorito. You almost have to do it in 2 steps, right? You have to go here first, make sure you're safe, and then go here. And you're giving yourself at least a 1 to 2 bunker lag time to respond to this very easy bunker to get to, so that by the time you get here, they're probably in the Omaha already, just because of how long it's taken you to get to the Dorito 1 compared to them doing it off the break. Okay? Are you with me so far? So again, if we draw this line, understanding that this is really the shallowest we can afford to go, then this tells us this is the D side. So anytime I'm a Dorito side player looking at bunkers, I can then very easily tell myself, this is the collection of bunkers. This is the collective of bunkers that I am going to play throughout the entire event, right? This as the attacker on the Dorito side. This is the majority of the bunkers that I'll ever play right here. And so you can walk the field very intimately, so to speak, each of those positions, and understand who can kill me in this position and who can I kill in this position. And again, going to our previous video that we talked about, which jobs do I do best, and therefore how can I help my teammates? Okay. Now, applying this same sort of logic, we can then look at the number 2 on the Dorito side, which has a bit more freedom now. And in this layout in particular, it's really just that they can play this center Dorito side, right? They're never going to go play the snake side, for example, right? So if we go and look at this same sort of thing, then now all of a sudden, given the nature of the number 2 position, we have these bunkers that are included in this list. But in addition to that, we also have these bunkers, okay? So when I, as a number 2 on the Dorito side, look at a layout, I look at this as my whole collection of bunkers I can look at. I mean, again, when you walk the layout, you want to walk every side of the layout. But when you want to try and understand an intimate, detailed perspective of the layout, this is really what you need to concern yourself with, okay? And if you have, well, we'll get to that when we talk about the number 3, never mind. So this, when I look at the field, when I physically walk the field, those are the bunkers that I'm looking at, because I know that those are the bunkers that my opponents, who I am mirrored against, are also going to be playing in, right? We all understand this, but like, this is really important to understand, because what this tells you is that if you see a guy, like if you are the number 2 on the Dorito side and you see a dude walk off the field right here, you know there's only one other dude on the other side of the field in front of you, and you can probably guess who it is, right? So if I see a dude walk out of the Dorito 2, I know that their number 1 on the Dorito side just died. So I mean, I might say kill the Dorito 2, but if I don't think to myself, there's only one guy in front of me now, it's a 2-on-1. If I don't think that in my brain, then I can't really envision scenarios about how I'll close out a point really quickly. Does that make sense? And that's really, really important to know. Okay. And here's the reason. If I kill, you can actually see it from that perspective right here. You notice how I don't see the cake guy right here, and I don't see the beast right here. Really? I mean, obviously the beast is a threat, but like, let's say for example, we kill the beast. Okay. So I see a dude walk right here. I mean, again, you have to bear with me. I'm kind of making a hypothetical, but this does happen. If somehow I get intel that the beast dies, and I understand what are the realistic bunkers that a number 2 on the Dorito side will exist in, and I hear kill the beast, that means that the number 2 on the Dorito side died, which is really, really important information, because what that allows me to do is immediately shoot the tape, and either I become the number 1 and I launch up the Dorito side to the Omaha, because look at this. Even if they're the Dorito 2, all I have to do is put this guy in for a second and then go right here, and I'm safe. Look at that. This entire lane right here is completely safe to me, because the home guy can't see me, right? We just saw this. The home guy can't see me, at least not in time, right? The home guy's right here. So by the time I run to make my move and I'm sprinting and I'm low and I dive, there's no way that guy's hitting me, right? Unless I'm just running into a stream. So that's how pro players and high level players close out a game really quickly, is they keep in their minds, well, given the set of bunkers that my opponents who are mirrored against me, given those bunkers and where they could be, it means that when I see a particular player walk off the field, I know who's left in front of me. Or again, assuming you see those people, right? Okay. So now that we've explained that, we can do the same thing on the snake side. So without going through every single step-by-step process, this is the widest that you can really reasonably go on the snake side. It's also because we don't really want to double stack the home in most cases, unless we're trying to kill a body. But that would be the only reason that we do that, because it's not, we don't want to have 2 people here when we could have a person here and a person out here, or we could have a person here and a person here, right? But the reason we put 2 people in the back center is because we want to have both of them shooting in a stationary position. So, all right, draw the line on the snake side, and we'll do the center last, but draw the line on the snake side, and then understand that as a number 1, you might play this bunker, but generally speaking, the bunkers that you will play are these right here, right? You won't even play this 50 snake side brick very much, and you really won't play this can very much either, because you don't really want to go here and here, though you can, but that would be pulling up pretty shallow in my opinion. But anyway, we won't get into that. And again, there will probably be teams who do this and then they find success, because what they're doing is they're countering very specifically what their opponents are doing. So that's why I say, outside of these basic principles, what you're really looking for is to metagame your opponents. You're looking to counter something very specific to what they're doing. But if we're understanding this from a principled perspective, this is generally speaking going to be true. Okay. So as the number 2, then your primary positions that you'll play in are going to be here, here, and here, and also actually in this layout here. It seems to be that a lot of teams are sending their number 2 on the snake side here, looking down the tape, while their number 1 is somewhere here or here, looking cross field. It's very easy to protect them from this position, and you're relatively safe from the Dorito side so long as you play pretty tight, because when they get to the 50 Dorito, if they get there, you just got to be very careful about your pack. And we actually saw that in a lot of the video footage that I recorded against Thunder, so which I worked on today, should be done tomorrow. So hopefully it'll be done tomorrow. So that means then as the number 2 on the snake side, the bunkers that you're really working with, I mean, you could say the corner. Hey, PogChamp64, thanks for the follow. Welcome. But so that, I mean, you could say that the corner is a bunker that number 2s will play, but it's usually a leapfrog bunker. But just to keep it into this circle, oh, excuse me. If we add the extension of what the snake 1 is playing, that means that this is the cluster of bunkers that you end up playing as the snake 2, the number 2 on the snake side of the field, right? Again, applying the same sort of line logic here. Okay, Doritos, snakes, center. Okay, so from the center, then we then have this channel that we just drew as you know, because of natural causes, I want to say, right? So generally speaking, if you're wanting to attack as a home guy or as the number 3, and you have 5 bodies alive, then these are the bunkers that you're going to be playing in, right? You're going to be playing these 50s. Okay, that's if you want to attack with 5 bodies alive. Otherwise, if you're wanting to fill a particular side of the field, you have to make a decision on whether or not you want to fill the strong side or the side that has more, you know, all 2 bodies alive. So you put 3 bodies that way and hopefully swing, you know, flip the field on your opponents so that way they can't respond to it. Or you can decide to fill the weak side because you lost a body. And so you're trying to help your teammate that's all by himself, all by his lonesome. Okay. And where you fill is not what we're going to talk about today. But that then means that if everything goes to plan and you don't lose bodies, but you kill bodies, then this is the cluster of bunkers you'll end up playing. This is primarily the cluster of bunkers you'll end up playing. But it's paintball. You lose bodies all the time, which ends up meaning that you need to know how to play pretty much all of these bunkers. Now, the big difference, however, with playing, like, there's a big difference between playing the Omaha as a number 3 versus playing the Omaha as a number 1. Okay, there's a big difference. And that is that the game has developed by the time the number 3 is in this position, which means that they do not have the dynamic of somebody watching over them and having a lot of the principles that a number 1 would need to know in this scenario. Okay, so in a way, you're playing a very guerrilla style or scrappy style, so to speak, of those positions. Let's use the snake side because this will probably make a bit more sense. So as a snake 1, given that, you know, let's say the first 10 to 20 seconds of the point, you know, you get to the snake 1, you're low crawling, you're getting into the snake 3, you're on your knees, you're looking up the field, and then eventually you low crawl to the 50, and then you again do that, and then maybe you go run down the field, right? That's what you would do as a number 1 on the snake side, playing those bunkers. But if you lost both people on this side of the field, and let's say they lost some players so that it's let's say it's a 2-on-3 scenario, and you filled out to the snake, this is a scenario in which you're probably going to be on your feet most of the time in a low squat, and you're going to be putting out as much pressure as you can by shooting over the top of the bunker, because you don't really have the ability, you can't really get in a kneeling position and kind of hunker down in this scenario, right? You have to like be actively fighting and finding your opponents in this down body situation. And the same would be true if you got up to the 50, right? You're not really on your knees looking on the inside of the field for kills because you don't have anybody behind you protecting you. So that means you're in a very active gunfightery kind of position, okay? So as a number 3, it can be very daunting to think to yourself, I have to learn how to play every single one of these positions. But as a number 3, very specifically, you are very much so playing a very quote unquote scrappy style of that position. The only time in which this is not really the case is, for example, when you're number 1, let's backtrack. Let's talk about the number 2. Okay. So the number 1 guy will only ever need to know how to play as a number 2. Okay. well, this isn't true. You should know how to play every single position on the field if you want to be a well-rounded paintball player. If you want to be a utility to your team, you should know how to do this regardless of what position you play. But the fact of the matter is that when you're trying to learn how to play proper, methodical, correct paintball, you have to start somewhere, and this is where I would start. Okay? So as a number one, there might be some cases in which you go out to the corner and then the guy that went to the cake behind you ends up becoming the number one for whatever reason. And so then he fills up, and you need to know how to protect that guy and help him get up the field, which is the number two's job. Okay, so you need to know how to do that. The difference there primarily is that number one players are not used to shooting a stream of paint and holding gaps and zones, but that's what you do as a number two. You shoot gaps and zones, and you just shoot a ton of paint. But number ones are very used to like dropping their gun, looking around, trying to see who's alive and who's dead. The druids of paintball, absolutely. Be the druid of paintball. But the number ones commonly make that mistake where they're not constantly shooting a gap or trying to hold a zone. I'm a WoW nerd. I relate everything to WoW classes. That's not a problem, man. You're among friends. So as a number one, you'll only ever need to know how to play the number two. As the number two, you will actually need to know how to play as the number three and the number one. Because if you lose your front player, you become the number one. And in some cases, you will double stack the home. And so you will need to know how to, like, you'll double stack the home on a weak side push. Okay, so for example, I'm just using this layout as an example. I'm not saying this is what you do, but let's say this is your breakout. Okay, so your number three is here, and maybe let's say he's shooting cross for whatever reason. And then these guys are doing their snake things, what they normally do. But now you are playing essentially the number three position, even though you are really the only person that's behind your front Dorito attacker, right? But you need to know how to play the number three in those cases because you're communicating to both sides of the field. You're calling who's alive, like you're calling the body counts, 55, 54, 34, whatever. So you need to know how to do that. And as the number three, you will only ever need to know how to play the number three and the number two. Okay? For those very same reasons that we've already gone over. If you lose your number two, then you fill out. If you decide to fill out on the weak side of the field where you lost that body, you now become the number two to the player who's in front of you. And then you play that position. Fortunately, the number two and three are very similar, so that's not a big issue. But that's how that works. Oh, excuse me, that needs to be a 2. Does that make sense? Any questions? That was a lot. But I actually am pretty happy that we got through that very concisely. Questions, comments, concerns, errors of grievance. All right, let's run through this exercise super lightning fast on the Sunshine State. Actually, I would really like to do a layout that is like old. But to be fair, a lot of these tricks and stuff work on more contemporary fields, so I'm not sure this will work super well, but let's just do this real quick on one other layout and then we'll be done with the subject. All right, let's do this real quick exercise here. So if I were to look at this field very quickly, I would actually say, oh, that's interesting. So I would draw the lines like this, which isn't very helpful. Yeah, this is actually really, really difficult layout to do this on. Let's see what happens if we draw it like this. So Dorito 1 would probably, oh, this is such a weird layout. I think I remember watching this field and most of the time Dorito 1s were concerning themselves with these bunkers, but even less so these bunkers. And I think Dorito 2 focused on these bunkers, which means the Dorito 2 guy would focus on these ones. And then the home guy would either go here or here, or support. Oops. Or support. So if we were to draw these circles, it'd be something like this. Oh, I missed one. Oh well. This. Well, to be fair, the snake, I remember people just fed into like crazy. So yeah, so this would be like the number 2 zone, number 1, the number 3, the number 2, and the number 1. So that's how I would draw it, which then kind of gives us this line to work from, which in this case is not very good. It would really just be this. This would be the line. Then you have your D side, center, and your snake side. That's how I'd look at that layout. So that's the exercise that I run through. And this is very automatic. This is very like when you show up to the field, it's very obvious in most cases. Snake off break. Yeah, this is the layout where people just dove into the snake like crazy. I remember watching this. This is where people were just like running into the snake immediately. And they were dying a lot, but they were doing it a lot as well. So, and obviously I you know, the number one could also go to the snake corner, but generally speaking, this is what they're gonna do from my memory. So anyway, that's a principle that works pretty well. So give it a shot. Obviously the next event that we really have, or at least in the NXL, is World Cup after this one. So I'll be very curious to do that on stream as well and see how that goes. But